Well, I think you've got to kind of look at it from the point of view of the L&D function, Sophie, and also the L&D role and the roles within the function. So I think a lot of reasons that L&D practitioners, professionals give us at Blue Eskimo for wanting to move on into other roles is perhaps that there's a lot of pressure on budgets, resources, there isn't a synergy between the kind of senior leaders in the business and what L&D are trying to do, so there might be a bit of a lack of understanding or a bit of apathy in terms of the L&D function. And I think some of the roles that tie in with that and the changes are partly technology enabled, but ultimately the theme being L&D getting taken more seriously. So you look at, for example, the rise of the L&D business partner role. That was commonplace in HR many years ago. It has been commonplace in L&D now for some time, but largely driven by the fact that the need to understand not just the learners, but also the senior leaders, what's keeping them awake at night in terms of, are we competitive, are we finding and attracting and keeping the right staff, are we driving forward revenues, they don't stay awake at night thinking, what does our learning look like? So it's understanding obviously what the top down side of things really, from a learner-centric approach. It's consulting with and engaging with learners and really understanding what their motivations are. So it's not just about the design piece. Obviously, it's what do you want designed? What are the challenges that you've got, perhaps to learning, and making both it easier for them to find it from a curative distribution perspective, but equally immersive and engaging. Yeah, lots of other kind of roles coming to the fore in different areas. So if you look at, for example, digital learning or blended learning, the agile Scrum methodology in project management is coming to the fore. So I don't mean agile in terms of a lot of the talk about agility within L&D, but actually the agile methodology, so quick sprints, reviews regularly, which actually is coming to the fore because fundamentally I think it probably works within the digital learning piece, quick bursts of energy, reviews. So from the point of view of agility and quality, the Scrum methodology seems to be getting adapted by businesses and project managers more. So that's a trend that we're seeing. I think there's a lot of increasing demand from our perspective, which started in the vendor space, which often it does, for example, for next gen and UX focused learning design. If you take away the kind of generic business skills side, this is more about the kind of gamification and the user experience side of it really. So we're getting more people asking specifically for people with distinct UX strengths or next gen learning strengths, which are the kind of some of the ones that I've mentioned. And really, I guess the other thing is consultants, learning consultants, because in a lot of different organisations, depending on the structure, role titles and job descriptions are different. So in some organisations, an instructional designer or a learning designer might be completely different than in another one. But certainly the learning consultant that I'm thinking about is someone who can make a judgment call on what type of learning intervention it needs to be, so that they can potentially even avoid over-egging the pudding when it comes to blended or digital learning programs. Will a short piece to video do, or even a few PDFs, as opposed to a fully engaging digital learning program, for example. So taking the learning and looking at what actually is required, as opposed to jumping straight into a learning program, perhaps. It's a very good question. I mean, I think obviously there's no yes or no answer. However, I did kind of prior to this do a quick analysis, interrogation of our network and our database, which has got over 10,000 L&D practitioners in it. And it depends on, I guess, what areas you look at. So the business partner area is much more prevalent. Digital learning and blended learning, I think probably about 50%, 45-50% of people had that in their records, profile, CVs, which I suppose you'd expect to a point. However, if you look at things like content curation, performance consulting, learning communities, less than 1% across the board. So not that surprising, but it'll be interesting to do that again in a year's time and see whether that percentage has changed much. Because some of the areas that I hadn't really touched on, or for example, the content curation piece, I don't see that necessarily obviously being a job position per se, a role per se. However, it's definitely a skill that more and more organisations want in their L&D function. Well, not necessarily, but I think in a lot of areas that's already happening, and it does depend on the role / skill / person really. But ultimately, it's only going to help from a career perspective, because clients now, a lot of clients we work with, a lot of the skills that they ask for used to be nice to haves, and now they're need to haves, like the stakeholder engagement piece, for example, collaboration. There's some of the softer skills. But if you going back to what you just said about the way the skills and whether they need to be looking at them, you look at instructional designers who, some of whom are instructional designers but not content developers, content authors. Others have taken that skill on board, learned content authoring tools, and so are now digital learning designers as well as instructional designers. But that doesn't mean that the people who haven't are bad. They're just perhaps more focused and actually in some respects might be better at their current role. But there are going to be a myriad of different areas that people can go into, depending on what obviously their strengths and weaknesses are. Some people are going to be more, from a character perspective as well, more inclined to move into a consultant area, for example, where they might be engaging further up the organisation as far as the strategic needs of L&D go, and others will prefer to just get better perhaps at the design piece, as trainers might prefer to just kind of be better at training and not necessarily take something like the COLF certification that the LPI offer for virtual classroom, for example. Yeah, I mean, definitely the skill sets that are needed and therefore getting asked for more and more, and we've seen this since we first started talking about it at Learning Tech and Learning Live, etc., is the kind of business acumen piece, depending on how you break that out, but ultimately being able to being effective at stakeholder engagement, being able to talk the language of the business. That's important skill sets to pick up. Almost kind of an account manager, sales type, not from sales per se, but an account manager, consultative approach in terms of looking at things like the barriers to learning. So that's where L&D and perhaps OD, organisational development, the lines are blurring a wee bit more. The project management side of it, obviously, as I said, from an agile perspective, certainly learning design, in terms of picking up new areas from the point of view of content curation or gamification or whatever it might be, and also the learning consulting piece, I think is critical. Data analytics I haven't really mentioned either, the learning data side of things, because obviously these days, learning management systems, learning experience platforms, there's so much information flying around in terms of data, then that's becoming a larger part of an L&D's practitioner's skill set, and I expect that to continue. Whether we ever get to the point, perhaps in larger organisations, we ever get to the point where the learning data analyst is often a specific job role in itself, probably unlikely in most cases, but I'd certainly see it going in that direction.